morning. It's Sunday, April 24. In many traditions, the Sunday after Easter is called Low Sunday. Seems like an odd name, but when you think about it, it makes sense. Easter is such a highlight for so many people. There's so much joy and hope, celebration associated with Easter Sunday. How can you match that? The following Sunday is therefore sometimes called Low Sunday. It seems like a bit of a downer. It seems like a bit of an afterthought, Low Sunday. And as we've been making our way through the words and phrases of Amazing Grace, I thought this Sunday might be an opportune time for us to reflect on storms. It's something that we find in the lyrics to Amazing Grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. John Newton experienced a storm, literally, and it's something that changed his life as he cried out to God for mercy and was spared. That was an indelible experience in John Newton's life. He never, ever got over the grace of God that he experienced at that moment. And it's something that John experienced in other occasions over the course of his lifetime. It seems as though God had a knack for rescuing John Newton. I'll explain a little bit more about that in this morning's message. But we know what it's like to experience Low Sunday, because after all the joy and celebration of Easter, we're brought back to reality, aren't we? Brought back to a world where there is a lot of disappointment and discouragement, a lot of storms that we go through, dangers, toils, and snares. And sometimes we wonder if Easter is really strong enough to carry us through all of the other days and weeks of the year. Because the world, as we are hearing in so many different ways, is a world of disappointment, of death. It seems evil has the upper hand. The victory of life seems so fleeting. We know it's coming one day when the fullness of God's kingdom is finally here, when death will finally be defeated. But until then, there are many storms for us to go through. The Apostle Paul writes about that in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4. He writes about struggle, hardship, but he also conveys the hope and promise of the gospel. Let me read these words with you. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 6 through 18. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal body. So then death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. It is written, I believed, therefore I have spoken. Since we have that same spirit of faith, we also believe and therefore speak. Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you to himself. All this is for your benefit, so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. You can hear in those words that Paul does not diminish the reality of suffering in any way. He talks about how he is abandoned, pressed on every side, perplexed, and yet none of these things are powerful enough to crush him. These are light and momentary troubles. There is a far greater glory that outweighs all of the suffering of our lives that is yet to come. You know, there's not a person alive who doesn't go through tough times. No one is exempt from suffering. We can all think of a storm that we've gone through. Maybe some of you watching this video are going through a storm right now. So there's nothing uniquely Christian about suffering, although there are many, many Christians who suffer specifically because they are Christian. But suffering is universal. There's not a person who does not go through a storm at some point or another. But what I'd like to focus on this morning is how we as followers of Jesus have a unique way of dealing with our suffering. We don't have all the answers. We can't probe all of the mysteries of suffering and where God fits into all of that. But we do know that suffering is not just random. There is a hidden meaning and purpose. God is present in and through all of our struggles, accomplishing something glorious in and through them. And we know one day that the glory of the kingdom of God will put an end to all struggle, every storm, every bit of suffering. It's perhaps best summarized in Paul's words when he talks about our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Now, when you're in a storm and it's pretty harsh, you might question Paul's description of suffering there, where he calls it light and momentary trouble. Sometimes suffering crushes us, it breaks us, it's unrelenting, it feels like we will never get our way out of it. We wonder where God is in all of that. But even so, we know that because God has come to us in Jesus Christ, who himself experienced incredible suffering, especially on his cross. We just experienced and celebrated that on Good Friday. Because of the victory of Easter, we know that suffering gives way to glory. The weight of suffering, as immense as it is nothing in comparison to the weight of the glory that is to come. John Newton certainly knew what it was like to experience the trauma of a storm. It's what he experienced that changed his life around. For him, that storm provided the key moment in his life when he experienced the power of God's amazing grace. It's interesting to note, as I mentioned earlier in this video, that he experienced a lot of other storm-like troubles that God miraculously delivered him from. Soon after that life-changing storm that he went through, that brought him into a relationship with God, John Newton was ready to go back to sea again. In fact, he was the captain of his own ship. He was ready to go. But 2 days before that voyage was scheduled, he was having a nice leisurely tea with his wife Polly, talking about this and that. All of a sudden, he experienced some physical trauma, a fit, a seizure of some kind. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak. He wrote about it later in these words, "It deprived me of sense and motion and left me no other sign of life than that of breathing. It was of the apoplectic kind." Like a stroke. After about an hour, he started to come out of it, but he had a terrible headache. He felt dizzy. Doctors told him that he was in no shape to set out to sea, so he didn't go. Another captain was found, chosen to go in his place, and that storm also encountered a violent ship encountered a violent storm on the open sea. In fact, the man who captained the ship in Newton's place never made it home. He and most of the crew on board were drowned. God spared him again. And then there was the time when Newton joined some friends on a hunting expedition. His gun accidentally went off when the muzzle was very close to his face. Newton's hat took most of the damage, or all of it, but he survived unscathed. God spared him again. He was serious when he referred to how God brought him through many dangers, toils, and snares. He would write once in his journal these words, "God protected and guided me through a long series of dangers and crowned every day with repeated mercies." It's because John Newton experienced such mercy that he, as a pastor, could share that hope and promise of the gospel with others. And there was one particular friendship where this was particularly and especially important, a friendship between John Newton and William Cowper. It's spelled C-O-W-P-E-R, but pronounced Cooper. William Cowper was a well-known poet, but he struggled with mental illness, emotional anguish, so much so that he tried to take his own life on many occasions. He needed to be confined to insane asylums where he spent many years. He had a lot in common with John Newton. Both John and William lost their mothers at a young age, the age of 6. Both of them became Christians as adults because of a striking encounter with the Lord in the context of suffering. For John Newton, that was a literal storm. For William Cowper, it was in the anguish of mental illness where he experienced the hope and promise of the gospel. It's hard to imagine that William Cowper, as broken and as tormented as he was by mental illness, could write words to poems that we now sing as Christian hymns that many Christians continue to sing these centuries later. Perhaps some of you can recognize the words that he wrote to this hymn, for instance. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Sadly, William Cowper never really experienced the assurance and hope that his own words conveyed. He was convinced that he was eternally lost, largely because God could never accept him, so he believed, because of his many failed attempts to take his own life. He believed that he had committed the unforgivable sin, unloved, unredeemed. He was tormented by endless nightmares. As he put it in one of his letters, spiritual hounds haunt me at night. But into this darkness and despair stepped John Newton, his pastor, his friend. When Cowper was released from an insane asylum in 1765, he lived with a family in a town near to the place where John Newton lived and served as a pastor. John and William became good friends. John spent endless hours visiting William. William was actually an assistant in pastoral visitation in John Newton's church. Sometimes going to see John was difficult, or to see William was difficult for John, but he did it whenever he needed to be there. Sometimes he was called in the middle of the night to go and ease this troubled soul. This went on for more than 13 years. William Cowper felt enormously blessed to have John Newton in his life. He once wrote, "A sincerer or more affectionate friend no man has ever had." The blessing of the friendship went both ways, because in William Cowper, John Newton found a capable poet, someone that worked with him and helped him write many hymns. Over 250 of them, in fact, 68 of which were written by Cowper. Without Newton's collaboration with Cowper, none of those hymns would have been written, including Amazing Grace. That was John Newton's hymn. But it probably would never have been written. The world would never have known it were it not for William Cowper. We owe him a debt of gratitude for this great hymn as well. William Cowper was in church on New Year's Day, 1773, when the words of Amazing Grace were heard for the very first time. Jonathan Aitken, in his biography of John Newton, puts it this way. He suggests that John Newton's friendship with William Cowper played a key role in the hymn's creation. Newton wrote these words, he suggests, in part to encourage William, whose depression was spiraling downward in a vortex of madness that would lead him to attempt yet another suicide a few hours later. Like all the previous attempts, this one was unsuccessful, thankfully. But that was the last time William Cowper would ever attend church, John Newton's or any other. Aitken puts it in these words, "It seems quite remarkable that the day Newton presented the hymn Amazing Grace for the first time was also the day that Cowper attended church for the last time." He would go on to live 27 more years, but he never experienced the promise and the hope of the words that God enabled him to share with the world. "Oh, for a closer walk with God," another one of his hymns, an earnest prayer that he struggled to believe himself. Or take this verse from God Moves in a Mysterious Way. "You fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break with blessings on your head." On his deathbed, there was a glimmer of hope for William Cowper. Those who were with him as he died noticed how his face lit up as he passed away, and his final words were these: "I am not shut out of heaven after all." Amazing grace at the last. The weight of suffering gave way to the weight of glory. The victory of Easter is all about this. For William Cowper, for everyone who trusts in the promise of the gospel, joy wins, life wins, hope wins, love wins. And I want to suggest to you that even though William Cowper struggled so much with mental anguish over the course of his life, even though the weight of his suffering was immense, he did see glimmers of this Easter glory in all the darkness. And this was in no small way because of John Newton. A true friend. William Cowper had a friend in the storm. I think you've known that blessing too. Someone who's been with you in the hard times, who simply, perhaps silently sat with you, wept with you, maybe spoke words of encouragement and hope into all of the chaos and darkness that you are experiencing. Maybe you've been that friend to someone. This is a great blessing, to be with someone in their storm, to give them the hope that perhaps others have also shared with you. I think of a song recorded by John Prine. It's a tender song. It's a duet that he sings with Leanne Womack. John Prine died from COVID complications in 2020. The song that I'm referring to is simply called Storms. And there's a verse that reads and sings as follows: "Storms never last, do they, baby? Bad times all pass with the wind. Your hand in mine stills the thunder. You make the sun want to shine." Friends do that for each other. They help us get through the storms. And there is one friend who does that better than anyone. One true friend, our truest, best friend, who was with his disciples in a boat on an open lake in a terrible storm, who was asleep, who got up, rebuked the winds and the waves. It's sort of a preview of the fullness of the kingdom of God, Easter hope, breaking into the disappointment and fear of the present moment. The storm is hushed. The power of Jesus is greater than the power of suffering. The weight of suffering is no match for the weight of glory. This is the same Jesus who is with us in our little boats, in all of the storms that we face. And we have confidence and hope because we know that this connection, this relationship we have with Jesus, our truest friend, is real because of the storm he went through, the darkness and dread of his cross. That wasn't the end for him. The sun would come out on Easter Day. The sun would come out of his tomb on Easter Day. And because of that, we know that life is stronger than death. Hope is greater than despair, which is what Paul expresses so beautifully in those words I shared with you about how we are hard pressed on every side, we are perplexed, we are abandoned. Outwardly we are wasting away, but inwardly we are being renewed day by day. This is all true because of Easter. The weight of glory crushed the weight of suffering. It's what gives us hope. It's what gives us joy in our lives. John Newton experienced this every moment of his life, every storm that he went through. Here's another poem that he wrote. "His love in times past forbids me to think he'll leave me at last in troubles to sink. By prayer let me wrestle, then he will perform. With Christ in the vessel, I smile at the storm." It's hard to smile at the storm, but we can do it because the love of Christ, the face, the glory, the fullness of God in the face of Christ smiles on us. I hope you experience that joy. I hope you share that joy. I hope that Easter joy and hope is yours on this Low Sunday and every day. Thanks so much for watching. Be well.